right, Chris here behind the camera. Thanks for watching. So today, to get started, I'm going to start removing all of the nice IPD bits and all of the shiny pieces that we showcase on this vehicle off of the vehicle so we have more access to the transmission. I'm going to be draining all the fluids, getting the wheels off, maybe getting the struts out of the way, so that way we have access to dropping the subframe and getting to everything that we need to do to remove the factory automatic transmission off this car. So I'm just going to get started here in a second and start removing all of these nice little bits and the wheels and get it racked, and the car is going to be on the lift for a while we are working on the manual transmission and preparing it to install in this car. So yeah, just want to take a quick peek underneath this car. It just looks so good. It's not dripping any oil. The bottom of the engine looks really good and dry. This is great. This car does have a 2.4 liter in it with really low miles. It's probably got maybe 50,000 miles on it since we installed it. We bought it with around 26,000 to 30,000 miles, I think, from the salvage yard, and we've only put maybe 25,000 miles on it since, so it's probably got a little over 50,000 miles on this 2.4 liter, but everything is really dry and clean under here, which is great. So we will be removing the angle gear later, and the drive shaft, giving us more access to work under here to get the automatic transmission off once we get everything over here out of the way. Here, I'll be working on the turbo, just updating the turbocharger to the production models that we have now, compared to the handcrafted one that's been on here since day one. But here's underneath the car, super clean. Got the angle gear out of the way, which had to come off of the transmission anyways. Drive shaft disconnected, oxygen sensors, everything, downpipe. All the coolant's been drained out of the car since I did remove the turbo. Yeah, it went really smooth. This car's had the turbo on and off of it so many times, but this is what's gonna be next. Removing this. And I'm gonna do some cleanup work under here. Clean up the bench. This is the original IPD 4T4 that was assembled, and it's still in just amazing shape. The center cartridge feels great. There's no shaft play. It's just really dialed. So I'm excited because we've had a lot of updates and versions to this turbocharger. So that'll go on there as well. There's the old angle gear for the automatic transmission, which will be getting replaced. And there's the automatic axle for the driver or the passenger side that will be getting replaced. Obviously, we're doing some extra things to this car while we're doing the transmission swap, or the M66, updating the front struts and things like that. So we've got the struts off of both sides. We've got things basically prepared to take the transmission off, but now we're on the top of the engine. And Bud, go and talk, you know, what's so crucial about what we have to do to set up to be able to get the transmission out of here.
To actually pull the transmission, we'll use a couple engine braces, support the motor, because we are going to have to lower the subframe. So we have a couple engine braces. We'll hook onto both sides of the motor here. It'll allow us to raise and lower this side of the engine so we can pull the transmission out the side. But like Chris said, we're currently in the prep stage, so we've removed the axles, drained the fluid, taken the front struts out, and it allows us to do a little bit of other maintenance and upgrades while we're in here doing the transmission swap.
That's right. So we'll basically get the airbox out of the way, turbo inlet out of the way, this thing out of the way. We'll have full access to the transmission. All right, everybody, look who joined the crew out here today working on the R. We got Paul.
Hello.
And then, as you guys see, Bud and I were over here. We were moving a bunch of stuff, and now Paul's just looking over everything, thinking about what we need to do. Go and just kind of talk through it as we're, what your plan of attack is here.
There's not a whole lot left with all of the transmission fluid drained out of the transmission and all of the coolant drained out. We can start disconnecting things that were full of transmission fluid and coolant that interfere with access. There's already this main radiator hose here that goes to the hard pipe on the back of the motor. We pull that so that we can access the bell housing bolts all along the interface between the engine and transmission there. We'll have a few electrical connectors to disconnect. On the automatic, it's just the P&P switch here and a speed sensor here. After that, we'll do the shifter cable, and all that'll be left holding the engine to the transmission is the bell housing bolts and the torque converter bolts.
Right. So up top, basically, like Bud and I were talking on the last bit here before Paul came out and joined us, the plan of attack is we will basically do everything up top here, bell housing bolts, and then we're going to go ahead when we don't need to have any access to the top, right? That's when we'll secure the engine and then go underneath the car and finish everything off down below.
Yeah, removing this thing because of the square subframe that sits underneath P2s and that the engine and transmission basically sit on top of the subframe. Once we have everything removed, where we can start thinking about removing bolts and lowering things down, we need to support the motor before we lower this side of the subframe enough to start undoing the transmission bolts and backing the transmission off.
Right, so we're doing enough as what we can up top before we actually support the engine, because we need some room to work up here before having these braces correct going across. So.
And that brace will make our job of removing those bolts a little easier too.
Right.
We'll drop this side of the subframe, make sure we support the steering rack so we don't pull the steering rack off of the end of the steering column, and lowering the subframe down and then lowering this side of the engine and transmission down a little bit will give us much easier access all the way around. And once it's all unbolted, we pull it back and off the end of the engine.
Okay, so we're under here. Paul, what do you think so far? I know you determined to take the subframe out, so we're doing that.
Yeah, I mean, there's really a couple of ways to go about pulling the transmission off of a P2. There's not a whole lot of stuff attached to the subframe on these cars, and if you have the benefit of getting the car high enough in the air and an overhead support for the engine, if you get the engine off of its mounts, you can drop the whole subframe by just disconnecting a few things.
Yep.
There's 5 bolts holding the steering rack here. Pull those, tie the steering rack up, make sure you're not snagging any lines, and you can drop the whole subframe down. You can see we've hung the entire knuckle with brake caliper and everything up here so we don't have to disconnect the brake lines. We have the control arm and steering rack disconnected. We have the tie rods disconnected, so we'll hold the steering rack up and drop everything else down, and that'll give us tons of space.
Yep. We already rotated over the engine so we could actually get the bolts on the back side of the flex plate here, which is great. Paul and I got those out, and now Paul's just going over everything here because we are going to go back up top here in a second, and we're going to go ahead and secure the engine, right?
I think that's all that we have left.
Yep.
Secure the engine, drop the subframe, and get the last bell housing bolts out.
Yep, and then use our tranny jack over there to line it up and pull the transmission out. So
Easy peasy, ignore all my grease and scratches.
yeah. But yeah, the good thing is though, is that like Paul said, there's just certain things that run along the subframe that, you know, we're both pretty familiar with, that there's actually been some quick disconnect stuff here because we have had the engine out of this car multiple times. So we've gotten lucky, but
none of these bolts are seized, for
none
example.
of these bolts are seized, so that was
They've all
good.
been touched a lot.
Yeah, so alrighty. Paul, go and talk about what we had to do here, because at IPD, we don't always have all the perfect tools, but we make it work.
It's not all our fault. Some of it is definitely also how they laid out the engine support points on the P2. You would expect, because it's an inline engine, that the support points would be in line, but they're a little bit diagonal for stability. We sort of have one lift point at one corner and the other at the other corner here. So instead of being able to use one hoist directly over, we've had to use 2 in order to make the slightly diagonal lift point work, but we made it work.
Yep.
With these engine supports in place, we can finish undoing the bolts on the remaining engine mounts. We've got our mount back there, our front mount, and our side mount over here, and then we can drop the subframe.
All right, looky what Paul and I just finished.
We've got the subframe fully off of the car, control arms and sway bar still attached and everything, and that's to give us the space to finish removing this transmission. With the subframe out of the way, we'll now be able to drop the engine slightly on this side, pull this panel, and we have the space to pull the transmission out this way.
Yep. So, again, engine is supported up top, subframe gone, which normally supports the whole engine and transmission, drivetrain.
The whole powertrain package sits in the rear on this mount, which actually goes through the steering rack and sits on the subframe.
Yep.
So we have the steering rack tied up. It sits there, it sits on a mount on the side here, and it sits on a mount on the front.
Yep. And
So
with
we
that
got
subframe gone, there's nothing to hold the engine up. So
we have it all hanging, and with it all hanging, we can raise and lower it at will and finish removing bolts.
we go ahead and we've got it all safe and secured, got all the bolts around loose, and Paul, go ahead and we've already got the transmission separated.
Yeah, with the subframe out of the way and with our 2 engine hoists up top, we were able to tilt the whole engine and transmission down on the driver's side, and that gave us plenty of room. This came slightly back, and now we're lowering it down.
Looks like it's ready to come out of the car. Transmission is clearing everything.
Our cooler lines on the front shifter linkage up top, and 3 big plugs are all that was holding this in.
Nice work. Here we go. Let me move the ladder. Again, all in all, what do you think, Paul? I think that was pretty smooth. What do you think?
We didn't hurt ourselves and we didn't blow anything up. That's the best you can ask for sometimes.
Right. No, that looks great. So obviously going over to a manual, next move is we're going to be removing this flex plate here and getting rid of that because we're going to have a nice new shiny billet flywheel on there soon, right, Paul?
Yeah. Check for other things while we're under here. It looks nice and dry, but while you have the transmission off, if you're doing a clutch or anything like that, you want to check for rear main leaks or anything like that. Like I said, this looks nice and dry under here. I think we're good there. So we'll just start with reassembly, I guess.
That's right. All right, we're inside the car now. Bud's been going at the center console and the shifter assembly and the shift cables for the automatic. Bud, why don't you go and talk a bit about what we're doing in here and what you just accomplished?
So we are obviously switching to a manual, so we need the shifter assembly that bolts right here. So we had to remove the factory automatic shifter. We're also going to replace the center console and go with the later style unit, which is a little bit better built. It's got a different center armrest. Then it has better paint on the sides. So these early ones scratch really easily on the sides and they just look bad over time.
That was Bud's idea. He told me he wanted to update the center console to the 05 and newer. Since this is an 04 V70R, he sourced a 2005 center console in really good shape, and it's currently off at the upholstery center getting a new center console cover and Atacama that we had done for it. So but yeah, Bud wanted to go at this, but so you took out the shifter assembly by first you started off by removing the shift knob itself, accessing everything, and then taking off all the trim, removing the center console out of the way, and then what, you just disconnected the shift linkage?
Yeah, just disconnected the shift linkage and then the plug. There's just a single plug that goes to this. So just disconnect that. Now we're gonna pull the shift cables out to run the new manual cables for the 6-speed. All right, now we're to the part of replacing or removing the automatic shift cable. So to do that, you need to remove the driver's side carpet. So we unbolted the seat, unplugged it, slid it back just a little bit, took out the carpet. Now we're removing the 2 retaining nuts that hold the cable assembly to the firewall, and then we'll be able to pull it out through the interior of the car.
Right. And we've determined that we're not even going to put the pedal assembly. A lot of people are going to ask about the pedal assembly, which we'll get to in another episode. But we're going to probably do that last because the car is dead on the lift right now. We don't have a lot of room opening the doors all the way to big it on our backs and take out the pedal box and all that kind of stuff and put in the new manual transmission pedal box. So we'll do that later. But right now we're just working on the shift cables, and yeah, like you said, Bud, got all the carpet out, got the bolts removed. Does the bolt just go around like a seal or retainer down there?
Yeah, there's a grommet that actually seals the cable assembly to the firewall. So there's 2 studs on the firewall with nuts that secure that in place to seal the cabin up.
Just do a little demonstration while the transmission's still out of the car, what this looks like with the new cables going on top.
So yeah, we're about to run these through the firewall. Then once we have the transmission in, this just attaches here, this attaches here, and then they fit in these brackets. So we would have used the old one, but this clip is broken on the used cables that we had. So luckily Volvo still has them available. We just ordered in a brand new set.
Perfect. Yeah, that did come with the kit of the M66 used transmission that we bought, but Paul freshened all this up and made it look nice and neat. So yeah, new set of cables still available from Volvo. There's the old one. They were all damaged and busted up, and we're like, you know what, we're just gonna get new cables.
And through the magic of editing, we have our M66 on the bench here, and we're gonna take a closer look at it. I just want to talk a little bit about how much we like the M66, not just because we like a manual, though of course we do like a manual, but this is a pretty stout transmission that Volvo put together. There are a couple of things you do need to look for on these, not in terms of the amount of power you can run through them. They'll take 400, 500, 600 horsepower easy, but a couple of little maintenance things you want to watch for. it's a little greasy around here, and one of the unique things about the M66 is that the fluid level inside the transmission sits in line or even slightly above where the axles go into the transmission. It's really important with these transmissions that you get on top of any fluid leaks as quickly as possible. It's filled with 2 liters of oil, and if you let it drop below where the axle holes are, you could end up in a situation where there's not enough lubrication inside and you start cooking bearings. You've got on this all-wheel drive M66, this is where the angle gear collar goes. You have an outer seal for the collar and an inner seal for the passenger axle. Both the front wheel drive and all-wheel drive M66 will have the same driver's side axle seal here. On P1s it's a little hard to get to, but on a P2, S60R, V70R, you should have no trouble at all. We've got our fill plug here, and a drain plug down here. They're both 24 millimeter. You'll want to make sure you can break the fill plug free before you drain out all the fluid. It's a little hard to get to on P1s as well, but on P2s you shouldn't have any trouble at all. Once you've drained the fluid, if you're just doing a fluid change, fill this up with either genuine Volvo fluid, Redline MTL, Motul, 75W80, those are all good options. You'll fill it up to this hole here, and when it starts to dribble out, that's exactly 2 liters. If you're getting a little more involved, if you suspect you have bearing trouble, or if you just want to check out the inside of the transmission and make sure the bearings and synchros are okay, these transmissions are pretty easy to split apart. Because this is going into our project car, this is part of our M66 swap, we do want to take a close look at the internals before we slap it into a car making near 500 horsepower. If you are also doing any service on it yourself, if you suspect you have bad bearings or bad synchros or a busted shift fork and need to pull it apart, these are pretty easy to pull apart. You've got 21 12mm bolts all the way around the perimeter there, plus one more hidden 12mm bolt on the inside of the bell housing. Pull all of those, pull your 4 bolts for the shift selector and pull that out, and the transmission will split apart. Alright. We've got the case off now, so we're looking at the internals of the manual here, the M66. We've got a couple of shafts, which is part of what makes this transmission so stout. A lot of rear-wheel drive transmissions will have 2 shafts, first, third, and fifth, second, fourth, and sixth, and then an intermediate shaft to relay it to the output. What makes the M66 so strong is that we've got 3 shafts instead of 2, so each shaft is shorter and the transmission is nice and rigid. What we want to look for while we're on the inside of this thing is our bearings here on the end of our shafts. We want to make sure these are nice and freely rotating, that they aren't darkened, that they don't have any bluing, that the rollers aren't scored. All of these bearings look pretty good. If you need to replace any of these, or if you want to replace all of these, we do sell on IPD's website M66 front wheel drive and all wheel drive bearings. You want to check the bearings both here and on either end of these gear sets. These all lift out one by one. You may have to play with the order in which you lift them out because they're interfaced together. You want to check the bearings, and you want to check the bearing cups in the case. Make sure those aren't overly darkened or scored or anything like that. If anything looks bad, replace them. Make sure when you're working on these bearing cups that you keep track of any shims underneath. That's how Volvo controls preload on all these shafts. There will be shims that space the cup up and down.
Right. So Paul, let people know, because you did a lot of research when we brought in the bearings and all the races and everything like that. What will the customer have to do? Are they going to have to go to a machine shop? Are they going to have to do anything to pull these things out, or get creative with pullers to pull these races out of here if any of them do look damaged or bluey?
This is, I would call it moderately advanced work.
Right.
If you've used a hydraulic press before or a bearing puller before, this is not a very complicated transmission to work on,
Right.
but it is still transmission work. You'll have to use a combination of bearing pullers to pull these off,
Yep.
as well as heat and cold. When I was working on the M66 in my V50, I used heat to drop the bearing races out of the case, and I used cold to cool down, shrink the new bearing cups, and put them in.
Right.
Now that we've got this open and we're inspecting it for the first time, there's a couple other things in here that you want to pay attention to. This relay lever here is for reverse. You want to make sure that's all nice and tight down there. Sometimes these bolts do come loose, and that this lever moves freely. It'll move our shift selector up and down to engage or disengage reverse. This right here is another known weak point on these transmissions. This is the first second gear shift selector fork, and on this transmission you can see it's already been repaired once. This part here is what interfaces with the shift selector assembly. As you move your shifter up and down, it will slot in here and move those forks up and down. And on this first second gear shift selector fork, this portion here is pretty thin. Aggressive shifting will sometimes cause these to crack and break off, and sometimes they just crack and break off on their own. IPD is working on getting all steel versions of the shift selector fork made for first and second gear, but in the meantime, this one looks pretty good. We made, just since it's been repaired and the repair looks pretty good, put this back together once we check out all the bearings, and these internal parts, not the synchros, not the bearings, not the shift fork, are available from Volvo individually.
Yep.
And unfortunately, with known weak points like that first second gear shift selector fork, the aftermarket has to step up. IPD is going to do our best to supply these kind of parts that we know are frequent failure items.
Right.
And for our own peace of mind, before we put this into a high-power car, we're going to check to make sure everything's okay.
Right. It was just funny to see one of the pieces that you were worried about has already been replaced.
Oh, yeah.
So, awesome. All right. Well, thanks for tuning in, and we'll keep you posted, and we're going to get moving. Paul, what do you think about this so far? Like, in your opinion, are we going to... How is this one looking so far?
This particular transmission looks pretty good. All of the bearings look like they're in good shape. Maybe we'll do the diff bearings. The bearing roller cage looks a little dark on it. As I mentioned, we sell complete kits for these. The diff bearings are kind of hard to get off, but we'll manage. Just had it open on the bench to check all the bearings, make sure they looked okay, sounded okay, felt okay. They all looked like they were in pretty good shape, except for the diff bearings, which looked a little dark. They still felt okay, but while we had it apart, we opted to replace them. I have the transmission in a soft assembled state. It's got all new seals on the outside, but I only have 2 bolts here holding the case together. I've dropped the shift selector assembly in just to make sure we can hit all the gears. Let's give it a go now. There's first. Spin the input. The output spins real slowly. There's second. Neutral there is the middle position of the gear shift, so that's third. That's fourth. Push that a little bit, get fifth. And sixth. And all the way over. Notice that direction change. That's reverse. Everything works. I feel no significant resistance on the soft assemble. I'm going to remove those 2 bolts, pop the case off, and put some high torque RTV in between.